and welcome to another episode of the Simply Equality podcast, the podcast that seeks to foreground the lived experiences of disabled and LGBTQ plus people. My name is Sarah Stevenson Hunter. I'm one half of Simply Equality. I'm a trainer, speaker, obviously a podcaster. And before we get into the amazing guest we have today, PK, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am PK, pronouns they, them. I'm the other half of Simply Equality, coach, trainer, kind of jack of all trades.
You're much more than that, PK. We have an amazing guest on today. We have Lizzie. They are known as LH Macbeth. They are also a drag king known as Himish Macbeth.
It's a pun that nobody gets because it's a gender, because it's him-ish. Based on the Hamish, but a lot of people don't get it. But
yeah, I do really enjoy it.
You are non-binary, neurodivergent, and have a chronic pain condition, which means that you're an ambulatory wheelchair on and off for several years, and you live in Scotland with your wife, daughter, and you're also a fierce advocate of pride in the disability scene and beyond. And you also work on accessibility as a consultant. So a lot of aspects there.
I do a lot of different things.
Tell us a bit more about any of those things you want to begin with, because it's a great combination of things, which is what we love on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, in terms of just, me, the individual, I'm non-binary, pansexual, only kind of fairly recently came out as non-binary. Yeah, I'm AFAB and have been in a queer relationship for 20 years. So kind of queer elder, but sort of trans youngling, if that's the thing.
Queer elder, trans youngling. I love that.
And sort of similar with the disability, and obviously I've always been neurodivergent. I got an ADHD diagnosis about 5 years ago now, sort of during COVID, during lockdown. And then my mobility difficulties have been more recent, but it's sort of been about 10 years now. I have a condition called CRPS, which is complex regional pain syndrome. A lot of even doctors have not always heard of it, but it causes just random pain, which mostly it's in my legs, so it causes me some mobility difficulties. So I use a wheelchair or I use crutches. That's sort of me, the person. I am a performer, so I am an actor and I am a drag king, my equity name. Is LH Macbeth, as you say, and my drag king name is Himish Macbeth. Performing is not the most lucrative thing, particularly when you're disabled and you're obviously having to cost you more to do it, and then the chances are not as numerous. So I also freelance as a consultant doing web content and accessibility consultancy and testing and that kind of thing. Yeah, a little bit of everything as well, PK.
So many different aspects. I guess the most not obvious, but the one I want to delve into, because our listeners may not be familiar with it. Obviously, in Pride season, there's a lot of talk about drag queens, but people may be less familiar about drag kings. And obviously, I'm really interested in your experience of being a drag king as somebody who's disabled. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about that, Lizzie.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. Yeah, drag kings are not as well known, not as well advertised as drag queens, but, we're part of the drag scene, always have been. And it is quite an integrated drag scene. I will be on with kings and queens and things. You get drag monsters, drag, you've got a lot of drag people that aren't within the gender binary at all. I'm sort of non-binary, but kind of masculining, so I'm I do kind of the more masculine presentation stereotypically. I don't even like using word like feminine or masculine because obviously it's all stereotype gender. Yeah, so I do that kind of thing, and it is hard because drag obviously is traditionally been underground in every sense. But before, I suppose you've now got RuPaul's Drag Race and a little bit more mainstream drag, and then you obviously did have people like Lily Savage and whatnot before that. But generally speaking, it's underground in a social sense, but that does lead into mean it's often underground in a literal sense as well. So it's mostly in basements, and obviously as someone with a mobility difficulty, that's tricky. I perform mostly on my crutches, and so I am able to make that work because I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user, and I'm generally more comfortable using my wheelchair. But obviously, not everybody is. I do know drag kings. There's a couple of great ones. One called EXO in London, and Quip Ladywood, who's based in Birmingham, who are full-time wheelchair users, and they don't have the privilege that I do of being able to go. Well, I'll get out and I'll go in on my sticks. I've been doing drag for 3 years, and I could maybe tell you 4 or 5 accessible venues. that I've been in that time. And, even those, they'll work. They're okay. Can make it, can make do. So in fact, I'm going to see EXO in a show at Museum of Comedy beginning of the month. And they kind of said, well, it is obviously I'm performing, so it is, but they're probably going to have to be on stage the entire time because getting on and off stage is so difficult and that kind of thing. It's trying to find a wheelchair accessible venue that is actually wheelchair accessible rather than can I just close my eyes and hope for the best is hard. And there are some amazing, I've just shout out to Shut Up and King up here in Scotland who do a lot of work, and they have a deal breaker that has to be accessible. So their shows have always been wheelchair accessible. Their shows have been BSL interpreted whenever they could possibly get the funding. I don't think I've seen any that haven't been BSL interpreted. There are a few places that are trying their best, a few places that are trying, but just the availability of venues is just, when you're obviously also on a shooting budget, trying to get, any venue that will actually, you can make some money and it can break even and they'll let you in and it's a safe place for queer people and all the rest of that. And it's trying to get accessibility on top of that is hard. So there's people who are trying. And then obviously you get some people who are just not trying at all, but why not focus on those people?
I haven't done drag in a long time. Also, Drag King, my
amazing
drag name was Lucian Gameark, which I thought was really funny, but was a reference to Shadowhunters and werewolf kind of vibe. And he also is a play on the word louche. But like when we were looking at changing venues, I think because the other thing that struck me as you're talking about wheelchair accessible venues is often what people don't think about is wheelchair accessibility for performers, not just attendees, because they kind of forget that actually wheelchair users are also performers. So when we were looking at a new venue, trying to find, like you said, that balance between, is this going to do a decent profit share that will actually enable us to make a profit while still making our ticket prices accessible to the people who come and watch us? Is this a queer friendly space? Is this a space? And like we had two potential venues that they were looking at, and one that I on a personal level hate with a fiery passion in Oxford, and also is just wildly inaccessible. There isn't, the only changing space for performers is up a very, very narrow set of stairs in a tiny room. So it is a nightmare, and it just would limit the amount of performers we could then invite to perform with us. The other one would kind of put us a little bit out, made it harder to make a profit. It wasn't impossible, but worked with an organization like that was more in the center of town, so it was easier to get to for audience people. They have a kind of more reach, but their accessibility was really good for performers and attendees. So they actually have like a wheelchair lift to get you between the green rooms and the stage kind of thing. There's enough space. Like I don't know how perfect it is, but it was like, cool, we have a chance to be accessible. Let's do it. I like maths, so I did the maths and was like, actually, we wouldn't have to put up ticket prices that much. The venue itself let us do a tiered ticket offering, which was really cool. So you can be like, pay less, middle of the range, pay extra.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that tiered pricing like that because it's just honesty based and just and
it makes it more accessible. So I think that's like considering that. I guess as a disabled performer, like integrating that into your art, kind of how's that been for you?
No, you're absolutely right. And it's tricky. And you do have to balance that stuff up. And as you say, just this venue's accessible. Oh, not the stage. You don't want to actually get the stage, do you? I have seen a lot of people who literally perform in front of the stage. But then, you've got less space for people to sit. It's tricky. Or you've got to come up on a very slow lift. Or, I've had to kind of get down into a performance area and sit and wait for an hour before because everyone else just runs down from the green room. But because I've got to go and get, there's a kind of, for listeners that aren't wheelchair users, there's a kind of little tiny wheelchair lift that you get in public venues sometimes where it's just, you just kind of go in and it just fits a wheelchair and it's sort of open air. A lot of the time that's operated by a key. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to find the person that has the key and, are they on shift today? And so it can take so long just to get down, like what is 2 or 3 steps. I've had to wait. I've had to perform by the side of the stage when I have been using my wheelchair, which I use it to host and for kind of spoken word. I also, I've done Rocky Horror drag-alongs a couple of times because of the character of Dr. Scott, who's a wheelchair user, and people are getting wise to the fact that you really should use someone who's genuinely a wheelchair user. And so something I get cast in every year because not a lot of wheelchair using drag kings up here. Been in a couple of different versions of that, but I have had to kind of still be by the stage. What I find, generally speaking, is the biggest thing that makes the difference is the attitude and the communication around it. I was speaking to a friend about it, actually, who is a the wheelchair using drag king who was offered a gig, and they said, well, what's the access like? And they went, well, I think there's a step. And they're like, well, okay, I can maybe, if I bring my partner, I can work that out. And then, but ultimately they didn't do it because the person was like, well, I think it'd be fine. I don't know. Actually, I'd rather someone said, well, there's this big step here and that's a problem. I can send you photos. I can, what can we do? How can we help? Rather than people also that sort of go, oh, it's fine. It's accessible. This is my actually bugbear, just generally, just not with Jack, just is the phrase fully accessible. People go, it's fully accessible because fully accessible is not a concept that exists, because fully accessible to who? It can be fully wheelchair accessible to a certain point. You have to have very wide doors because some wheelchairs are very big. You have to have a changing rooms toilet to be fully wheelchair accessible. Everything just to be wheelchair accessible. But then you go, well, okay, so have you got braille on things? Have you got, accessible for people with visual impairments? And then with neurodivergence and people getting overwhelmed, and make sure that this person is visible, but then someone's like, oh, there's too much going on here. So you can't have one single experience that is fully accessible. You've got to have universal design that gives different options for accessing something, because it's just, so that's my kind of big red flag. I go, oh yeah, we're fully accessible. Yeah, it's fine. Oh no, you're not then. Yeah. And toilets is a big thing as well. You go, oh yes, but you can't use the toilet, or places that, go back to drag, that will use, we can use a disabled toilet as a changing room because it's a nice big space. You go, well, what about
disabled people?
Disabled people need the toilet, and it's, yeah. And that's the interesting thing with the intersection as well, because obviously the disabled toilet is often by default the gender neutral toilet. It means that I, as a non-binary person, in a way, it's a good thing because I don't have to, I kind of feel not quite right using either set of gendered toilets. I tend to, the choice like that, use the ladies because it smells better and it's cleaner. But often I'm using disabled and I'm like, oh, it's a gender neutral. Then, I've other kind of people who are scared about being challenged in the wrong, very common, obviously wrong gender toilet, would use a disabled, I think, as a disabled person, yeah, come and use my toilet. But it's not the solution. And it means that, those toilets are even more oversubscribed, which is...
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a big hot topic at the minute, isn't it?
Yes.
And that is something as a result of the Supreme Court ruling and how people are interpreting it, that whole thing. Oh yeah, just use the disabled toilet. Well, disabled people, we don't mind in some ways. We want to be inclusive, but...
Yeah.
Disabled toilets exist for a reason.
Absolutely. Whatever situation, if someone is not feeling safe, they can use my space if it feels safer for them. But, and something doesn't get talked a lot. Disabled people struggle with incontinence and that kind of thing. And so it's, actually getting a toilet quickly can often be a really important thing. That's a horrible thing to struggle with when you're out in public. I don't have a lot of experience of it, but I do have a little. But the other thing, obviously, with about that, from a different point of view, is the whole third space issue of, oh well, yeah, they can use. Everyone can just, anyone who doesn't present in an absolute binary way can just use the disabled toilets. And it's like, well, actually, that's not the answer to that social issue, to create a third space, even apart from the issue of that third space being oversubscribed, it's not a solution.
On the issues of just like disabled toilets almost by default are non-gendered spaces, which reinforces this really odd idea of disabled people as not having a gender, which has been talked about from the other point of view, right? Which is just like, if that's your only non-gendered space, why is it disabled people don't get gender?
Yeah.
And similarly, like, I know when we do shows, we pushed for every toilet just gets labelled gender neutral.
Yeah.
Which tends to work. Like, the issue is if there are urinals in place, then what happens is you have a default men's because very few people want to go where the urinals are, but you have men using the sort of women's and or masculine people to use and that gets complicated. But I think it is an important... People just want to pee in peace, I think, is the end of the thing, and like wash their hands. And like, I don't really...
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Like, if you want to create truly sort of equitable spaces, you could get rid of urinals because they're gross anyway. Like, I tend to use the gents, and it's very fascinating.
Yeah.
Because in women's, I get shouted at a lot, even pre-facial hair and all of that stuff. Like, when I still had boobs that were quite large. And like, the nice thing about gents is the weird thing is that everyone's so aggressively trying to not be seen as gay because, oh, God forbid, that they make really aggressive non-eye contact and no one's looking at each other or like chatting to each other. You're just kind of getting in, getting out. And it's nice because then no one challenges my existence because they're so busy trying to not be perceived or perceive me. But it's also very bizarre where you're just like, imagine if we could just do the same thing that you do in like the women's toilets where you just like have a chat while you're waiting in line. And like, I forgot that men don't do this once and did this to a random man because I couldn't get the hand dryer to work, and the sort of look of fear on his face and then the sort of softening going, this is how your hand works. And it was just like,
yeah,
it was funny because it changed the whole vibe of the like room from this very like fearful place to, oh, this is okay actually. And I'm not saying we should be friends with everyone in the loop, but like,
Yeah.
We've talked quite a bit about the practical logistics of being a performer. I think the interesting thing as well is obviously representation is important. You've mentioned a few drag kings who are full-time wheelchair users. I guess it would be really great if you could talk a bit about how you incorporate that obvious aspect to your disability, like mentioned crutches. Obviously, the audience will see those crutches, whereas I too wouldn't as a blind person. But in terms of incorporating that into your act?
Yeah, that's always been really, really important to me. The mobility aids that I use are not, there's me and there's, whatever fabulous the costumes and then, oh, sorry, if I now got to use my crutches. I say particularly a lot of my acts are on crutches and I can move around more with them, which is also good. But they all have costumes. So I was at Dundee Pride yesterday and I was doing one where both my crutches turned into umbrellas. It's actually a version of, I think it's Tom Holland lip sync that does Singing in the Rain and then umbrellas.
Yeah.
I use a cover version of it. But yeah, so it's kind of a drag version of that, and I made them into these big umbrellas. I've got other ones I kind of do crutch reveals, so I've got one that's got an outer thing on it, and then it uses magnet tape, and I pull the outer layer away, and then there's something else underneath on the crutch. I tend to start when I'm trying to plan like an act or a costume of what will my crutches be? How will they come into it? I did a look that I had to do the Poseidon. Okay, well that's got a trident there that one of them is. Yeah, originally I kind of had one that was a cocktail umbrella. I had to do a cocktail look. So I always try and, this is part of, ability aids, should be regarded really as part of someone's body, which is why you shouldn't touch them and sit on them and that kind of thing without consent. And so, therefore they get costumes and they're going to get better costumes than I do a lot of the time. But
I'm sure that's not true, Lizzie.
I bet just because I start thinking about them and then I was like, oh, I need to wear something as well on my sort of fleshy body. Got another one that's Dick Van Dyke where they're chimney sweeps. Wheelchairs are harder to dress up because of the amount of moving parts, and you've got push-room covers and the spoke things, and it's absolutely important to me. This is not like an additional apology and like, oh, if only I could just not have this would be better, wouldn't it? It's like, no, this is intrinsic. Getting quite good at like balancing on my crutches and doing kind of, almost acrobatic kind of things. And it mainly worries that occasionally when people don't realise that I do use them because I need them primarily.
Oh, they think they're just a prop.
Yeah, and I've had them with the umbrellas. We're like, oh, so you've made those umbrellas, and so I didn't. Oh, and you also need those crutches. Like, yes, and it's why the flip side of representation. Always sort of try and really encourage people to please not use anything that is a mobility aid of some description as just a prop. Like people occasionally have straight jackets in their acts and that kind of thing. And that's something that, not used now, but has historically been used as genuinely and as can have trauma associated with it. Or, someone with a cane or something. I go, oh, that's nice. It's another disabled performer. I go, oh, no, it's not. They're just using it for effect. So I do try and encourage people to not do that, because then the visibility, that it's there, because that's the biggest thing. Like I went into drag, so I have ADHD, so I go on tangents.
That's okay, I understand.
I kind of went into drag in a kind of like, oh, I'm going to have to, okay, I'm on crutches, but I'll see what I can learn. And that's not what it's about. I don't want to be like a disabled performer. And now my bios do sort of describe me as a disabled performer, not because I think that's the most important thing about me, but because it's an intrinsic thing about me. Partly it's good to highlight for casting so people kind of know, certainly as an actor, I've occasionally kind of showed up and they've gone, oh yeah, we use a wheelchair. Yeah, no, but we've got steps here. I don't know what about that. So it's partly because of that, but partly because of that visibility. When I get messages or when I get people coming up going, I'm a wheelchair user, does this mean that I could maybe do that? Seeing someone else that kind of uses crutches like that, actually just using them on stage and not just kind of going, well, I'll leave them, I'll see if I could do without them. Just when I get messages, I screenshot all of them and I've got like a folder of like little nice messages that I've had. It's what really kind of keeps me going, particularly, when it has been a bit of a bad day for accessibility and inclusion. And from that point of view, I love that. And I think representation really is everything, and just doing it. I mean, I do end up talking a lot about being disabled, but my acts aren't really about just everyone that's like a disability pride act, but they're not about that. It's just that they're about me and I'm using them, in the same way that someone else's act isn't about their arm. They have their arm with them. They're using their arm, but that's not what the act is about. So I don't generally, I know some people do, that focus on doing quite disability focused acts. And that's great. I love watching that as well. But for me, generally, I just want to do something fun or silly or, political from other points of view. And then the fact that I'm using mobility aids is like, oh, and that it's just the visibility. It's just the, and it isn't in the separate category of disabled performing, which is like a slightly different / inferior style. It's just performing, but that's just what I have and what I use.
On a smaller scale, I'm the same when I'm doing talks, or even when I was in a music video about 2 years ago for a sort of metal band. And part of that, they did actually use a shot of me unfolding my white cane.
Yeah.
And actually, I was really pleased that something for me is just an everyday, I get my cane out, put my cane away. It was in there. Also, when I'm doing talks, part of me used to be like, oh, should I not have my cane on stage? And now I'm like, well, no, but the white cane isn't me, but it's part of me and what I use. It was funny at my graduation years ago, though, when I had a long gown on and a white cane, which has got little reflective strips on. Apparently, I looked a bit like Darth Vader. But
amazing.
Hey, there's no harm in that. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think representation matters, but I think also having it seen as we're disabled people, we're queer people, but we also are actors, parents, whatever we are. Our disability and our queerness is just an aspect of who we are.
It's such a difficult thing. It's like, it is an important aspect, but also it's not, if I'm doing a piece of web content, it's not gay web, it's not the same. It's just in terms of my day job stuff, it's what I enjoy about working from home, because people don't, I can work with people who don't even know that I have mobility issues because they see my face on a Zoom call or they hear my voice online. So it's in that way, there's not visibility at all, but it's difficult. You want that balance of having representation of visibility and going, well, that's not all I am. That's not my entire identity. But the more needs you get, talk about kind of lockdown and everything. I used to do an office-based job where I kept having these issues with mobility and pain and everything, and so I was working from home, and that was my adjustment, because I had a long-term condition and I was working from home, and so I'd be at it. Everyone would be round a conference table, and there would be the little laptop in the corner, which was me, and mostly they would remember I was there, but it was very difficult to really be part of that. And then obviously after lockdown happened and working from home has been normalized, it's suddenly like, oh, that's not a weird thing anymore. Oh yeah, I just work from home, and people are like, yeah, my wife is mostly remote working, and it's normalized. So I think with anything, it's like the more people do it, the more people see it, and it just tips. Okay, that's a normal thing to do, and then you feel so it's just all more inclusive, because everyone's no one's going, oh, that's weird, isn't it? You're working from home and you're in that corner, and that's weird. Well, you've got a chair there. Have you shown me how that works?
Pre-pandemic, it was such a battle to get an agreement for somebody to work from home for part of the time. And it's not that, many, COVID was horrible. It had a lasting effect on this sort of health, mental health, everything. But there were some parts of it where it's like, look, the world didn't collapse because we had to work from home.
Yeah, it could show that things could work in a way that you couldn't. Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that on purpose, because as you say, it was devastating in so many ways. But it did, at least we can kind of go, well, let's take that good thing at least from it, let's take that learning from it, let's learn as much as we can from the terrible thing of how we can continue just to make the world better on a continual basis, which is what I just think we should be doing. It's a controversial view apparently in this day and age.
Honestly, PK, don't we? That's a lot about what we talk in our training about. People just don't realise how everyday inclusion just helps everybody.
Yeah, because I do, disability awareness training and that kind of thing as well. And one of the points is that a lot of things that are accessible, they're there for accessibility, are also there for everyone. It's something that I was watching, they kept posting video updates for something. Okay, well, I'm going to have to work out how to listen to this because I'm in a loud environment. It's like if they put subtitles, which you think, oh, they're for deaf, for hard of hearing people. But yeah, but they're also they can also help so many people. And that's the case with a lot of disability adjustments.
Yeah.
Not that, again, everything's got a flip side, doesn't it? Because you kind of go, but that shouldn't be, it's like the business case for I hate the business case for accessibility and have to make it sometimes. I go, well, do 20% of people, depending on what figures you look at, are disabled? You can make more money if you make sure that your website is screen reader compatible, for example. I hate it. That's not the point. Your website should be screen reader compatible because there are people who can't read it otherwise. Your stuff should be accessible because we live in a society, but unfortunately it doesn't always quite fly. And I do I have to grit my teeth and go, also economically.
Yeah, I think, it's that hard thing of making the business case and being like, it all boils down to your money and capitalist hellscape, etc., etc. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating and always reminds me of that kind of adage of it shouldn't have to affect you for you to care about it. And that shouldn't be a radical statement to make.
It really shouldn't. And you were starting to see, to a certain extent, the business case for what I thought was really interesting when Wetherspoons said, oh no, our toilets, we're not going to police our toilets. I had a friend who's coming from abroad who's trans who was like, okay, so Wetherspoons is a safe place for me to go. And it's not something I normally associate with Wetherspoons as being a lovely safe place for queer people. Like, it's not. I just thought it's really interesting because that decision about their toilets was not made out of compassion or the community, or it was made because that's easier and it's going to make them more money that way. And it kind of almost in a way heartened me because I was like, well, maybe people will realise that, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but...
you can swear.
Yeah, I don't know if people realise that being a total dick to trans people just isn't economically viable, and maybe that's why they'll stop doing it. And that's not really why I want them to stop doing it, but if it works.
I mean, it's really interesting because I hadn't been in Wetherspoons for years just because, I don't know, I get what they do, but I didn't like a lot of the politics of the guy.
Yeah.
But I have to say, in the past month or so, I've actually been in Wetherspoons in Birmingham visiting a friend. And actually, it was really weird because on the one hand, I felt safe to go to the toilet. I mean, I have another issue because I'm blind and my friend is blind, and obviously there are some logistics with that. But I felt safe in that context, and yet we end up chatting to somebody who turned out was quite a Trump supporter. It was a really interesting juxtapitation.
Yeah, it is interesting because, as you say, Wetherspoons, I mean, is it Tim Martin who's, big Brexiteer? It's also, politically not aligned, but I've been in them because they tend to be accessible because they're bigger and I think that's maybe talking about that kind of whole intersection between disability and queer identity is that obviously talked about with drag, but a lot of queer venues tend to be smaller, more cramped, less funded, less accessible. And then you kind of end up having to go, well, I can't go to that beautiful little queer cafe that's down in the basement in the nice area of town. I will have to go to like a Wetherspoons or a, whatever, not singling out necessarily Wetherspoons in particular, but, somewhere that I'm not happy with the community in there, but I can get to the toilet and I can order a drink, which is, you do need that. And products that, all kinds of things that you can go, but really that's the most accessible, but it's not. I think it's really difficult.
What's the examples you give, PK, of everyday items?
Well, yeah, there are like everyday items that people don't even think about that were accessibility things. So like sliced bread, your electric toothbrush, all sorts of things that we just use, even in terms of like the kind of handles that you have on different cooking utensils. There are all sorts of things that we just, realistically an accessibility item is an electric kettle.
Yeah.
Right. Like that actually just means that a lot of disabled people can boil water in a safer way. And we just take these as, they're just items of modern convenience. And I think the thing to remember, and as well, because people talk about funding, like, we've got limited funding and limited resources. And it's like, yeah, we absolutely do. But often it costs more to try and retrofit accessibility and to think about it after the fact. And I think this is the nice thing that we're starting to see in smaller instances as sort of more LGBT spaces return to a kind of grassroots thing. And obviously it's not universal, but there is that bigger discussion on accessibility. How do we make our spaces accessible, for disabled queer people who want to come and be in our space, especially when we are working on a shoestring budget, when we can't necessarily be building our own venues. And I think that is at least more of a conversation and more people are starting to kind of go, is your venue accessible? Like I know like there were massive issues when one of the only gay clubs in sort of Oxford moved to an inaccessible venue and people were like, this is ridiculous. Your previous venue was accessible and it was great because of that. And now you're up a flight of stairs and you just have basically said to a whole section of the LGBT community, I don't care about you.
Moving from accessible to non-accessible is just like what not communicating why, or because there's a venue. I mean, I'm not going to name it, but there's a venue in London that had to do that, and they had a lot of criticism on social media, and they didn't. I ended up sort of speaking to them, and they said, well, the thing is, basically, they were basically thrown out of their venue. Like they had to move, and they couldn't find one, and they went in and they asked for accessibility, and they looked at, well, we can got this, and then they were having plans to kind of put in, and they had thought about it, and they were talking about that, but they weren't telling anybody in the community about that, because they didn't want to look bad by saying, yes, we're accessible. So admitting, even though everyone was commenting, saying, well, I mean, you're down a flight of stairs. It's not, it's not hidden that you're not. So just saying like this is, even if you do sort of trying to have that conversation and involve people and pay for consultancy where possible as well. I think it's again one of the kind of double-sided issues. So many things. It's like, oh, there's this, but on the other hand, because actually speaking to disabled people about what they need and what works for them, and testing with them and that kind of thing is really important. But that doesn't mean just every time you have a question, just like email your local wheelchair user, your local blind person, going, oh, what do you think about this? Like you've got to respect their time at the same time as talking to them.
I mean, I remember having worked for quite a few large organizations in my time, and as a JAWS user, that's a screen reader for the listeners' sake, big thing. I was probably one of like 2 screen reader users, honestly.
Yeah.
You'd get emails about, can you just check this with the screen reader? And I don't mind like a couple of page documents, just give it a quick look and stuff. But then you'd get, oh, we're launching a new website or a new partner website. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's people out there like yourself, Lizzie, who that's their job. That's what they do professionally. But they're like, oh, we don't have the budget. It's like, well, sorry, your budget is a choice.
Yeah, your budget's wrong. Like it needs to be in the budget. It just needs to. So often you'll find, oh, you've got the budget for that really fancy logo, or you've got the budget for, a launch party, or you've got it's not always the case, and particularly grassroots events, it's not. But when you do get into established businesses, you kind of go, you have got the budget. You're just choosing to use that budget for something else. And that's not the same as not having the budget.
Absolutely.
And often, as you say, like having the budget at the beginning is so much cheaper than trying to go, particularly obviously, the kind of places that are large enough to kind of get sued and that kind of thing. It's a lot cheaper to just pay someone for half a day of screen reader user testing or whatever the thing is that you need to be tested.
Yeah. And it's easier to fix at an earlier stage, right? If you've got a project, and especially with tech, and you've been developing it, and then you only sort of bring it in right at the end, sometimes that can be just massive amounts of code that having to like rework because you just haven't done it. And so if you brought this in earlier, that would have been less of a problem. It's kind of like if you have a leak in your roof and you just ignore it in the hope that maybe it will just magically solve itself, it's just going to end up with like hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of repair rather than maybe a few £100, depending on the thing. The sooner you act, the better. And I think also there is something that struck me as you were talking about that kind of communication piece, right? Because there is something to be said for managing the expectations. And I think often companies are afraid to say anything because they're like, oh no, they'll just think we are wildly inaccessible. And you can say, look, we know this is less than ideal. This is what we're doing about it. And again, you can, if you're not sure how to communicate that message, hire someone who knows how to communicate that message. Because even if it seems like it's an expense, realistic, how much time you're wasting on social media, not being able to communicate this well, how much money you're losing because people are writing you off as not for them. So actually, if you think about the stuff that you're not seeing, spending that much money on a consultant, on someone who can help you with the comms messaging and going, yep, we are doing X. So we're moving this venue because we've been thrown out of our old venue. We're trying to look for an accessible venue. We're struggling. This is what we've had to do in the meantime. We know it's not perfect, but we're working on it. And I think that actually goes a long way to building trust and also signaling that, yeah, we do care about this, but also our hands are tied in a real way. And for sure, you're still going to get some people who are like, that's not good enough. But the vast majority of people will appreciate you saying, this is the situation. This is what we're trying to do about it.
And the people saying that's not good enough can still see that it's not good enough. Like they can still, the wheelchair kind of example is just always a really easy example, but you can see that there's a flight of stairs. Them saying, I'm really sorry, there's a flight of stairs is not going to go, oh, I hadn't realized. I was just going to try and just sort of levitate and see what happened. You've got
Bring my magic carpet.
Yeah. And so just the kind of, unwillingness for anyone to just can say, this is not perfect. It's like things aren't perfect and things are work in progress and things, I'd rather have something nothing, but it's, the kind of trying to hide the fact that you're inaccessible just makes things even more inaccessible.
I mean, it strikes me, obviously this podcast and our work at Simply Equality is about that intersection of disability and LGBT identity. And a lot of what we talked about, I'm going to use that horrible word, compromise.
Yeah. We
have to live lives of compromise. And I don't know how you found that, Lizzie, in terms of that tension, like in your drag work. You love drag, you obviously want to do more of it, but you have to compromise where you do it.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. And I think the amount of times I'm sitting going, I'm so uncomfortable here, and I have like 50 things about me, like texts my pals about going, fuck's sake, they don't, they haven't got this, or not only have they got a flight of stairs, but the bar downstairs isn't open, so I have to somehow go upstairs with crutches and then bring a drink back down, or like text, but I'm not complaining about every last thing. But then I think what people see a lot is people complaining, because they sort of almost don't see the disabled person until the disabled person is making a complaint. And then they're like, oh, they're just always complaining and they can never compromise. And it's like, do you know, I have come so far along compromising to eventually go, but can you not just please? Like with the captions on the video that was said about yesterday, a group of people had been saying, can you just put on auto captions? Even if you don't check the captions, even if you don't write anything out, it's not a good, but can you maybe just do that? And so can you maybe just have this one little, you're always complaining. It's like, no, I'm not. I have compromised on 50 things there. And, it's the spoons thing as well, isn't it? It's the energy thing, and it's the constant kind of just not being sure and not. And I think that's, sorry for another tangent, but the whole thing about, again, that intersection. There's a quote from someone who I mentioned a couple before this, actually. It's that you're only allowed one weird. And if you're queer, you're sort of already weird. Or if you're disabled, you're already. And if you can't bring in another one. That's always like, that's greedy, whatever. You can't, or people will accept kind of one. You go, okay, well, you can be gay, but can you be normal gay? Or, you can, yes, okay, you can be a wheelchair user, but you have to be straight. As soon as you kind of get these multiple intersecting things, people think you're being difficult somehow. It's like, I'm not actually doing any of this out of some kind of, it's not a choice. It's not a, obviously people have also got, the people of colour, or it's society that has made these things the weird thing, not me. So I'm just being me. They pile on top of each other. It does so become just so more exponentially more difficult the more weirds that you have,
How weird can you be?
Yeah. And there's a shout out to Weird Pride Day, which is, by the way, on my birthday, it's the 4th of March every year. To
Well, there is such
weirdness.
a thing as Weird Pride.
Yeah,
I did not
Weird
know
Pride.
this.
It's quite a small movement, but it's if you look it up, it's on the 4th of March, which I happen to know because it is my birthday, which I enjoy that. And they just, I think they have little marches or events, and they just, it's for neurodivergent people, anyone that's kind of just celebrate being weird. Fantastic.
That is pretty great.
Fantastic concept.
Sometimes it does feel like no matter what you do, it's too much or too wrong. Just because that's what society says. But I think there is also, as you said, there's always the flip side, right? Which is just, and we talk about this in a lot of work that we do, which is if you're bothering to tell someone that they could do better, even if you're just saying, hey, could you just have an accessible entrance? Could you just put on the auto captions? You're not having a go at them. You're saying, look, I genuinely think you are capable of doing better, and I want you to be the best that you could be. And I think if, as organizations and individuals, we can get into that frame of mind when someone is bothering to take the time to complain at us, and for sure, people are more likely to complain than leave positive feedback, they're still using their limited resources to be like, come on, you can do better, and I believe in you.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think we've kind of made it to queer venues as well, of the reason that I have taken time and energy to come and raise this thing about access is because I like what you're doing. I want to come to your show. I want to engage with what you're doing. I want to be part of it, and it's good, and I like it. And can you just make this little change so that I can get in the door, or I can actually, I think that's so important. Like, I'm not making complaints to, I'm trying to think of places I don't use, or, I'm not, I wouldn't randomly complain to, well, a place I'm never going to go anyway. A complaint is even the wrong word. It's feedback, which is a wanky word, I know. But it's, I think to see it as a complaint all the time is, here's some help that you make things easier for people. Here is a thing that if you do this, you won't get as many complaints, is essentially what that's saying as well. But yeah, it is. It's because I like you. It's because I want to, I want to be part of it. And that's a good thing. Yeah, really, really good point.
You've talked about your personal journey, being queer, being disabled, been a journey of different stages. I'm just wondering if you had any words of wisdom or thoughts, observations for anybody listening to this that's still on that journey of acceptance with their queer and disability identity. Just whether you had any thoughts or any reflections on that, Lizzie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I suspect it's always a journey. I think in terms of the disability side of things, I talk a lot about disability pride and the concept of pride and what pride really is, and particularly the word in straight pride kind of crowd. It's like pride is something that comes out of having had the flip side, which is shame, feeling either ashamed of yourself or being made to feel shameful, and so you have pride there to counteract that shame. And I think particularly with disability pride, you're going to go, well, why are you proud? Do you not want to not need a wheelchair? And it's like, yeah, I would much rather I could go running and I could, it's not that I'm proud that, in that sense, but I'm proud of who I am, in a way that kind of counteracts that shame. So I think disability pride is important. Disability joy is really important. But I suppose one of the things I would say to people is it's okay if you're not feeling that. It's okay if you're also feeling sad and overwhelmed and trying to deal with strictly diagnoses or changes and that kind of thing. Like, don't, I know I have spoken to people who kind of go, well, I know I should be feeling the pride and the joy. It's like, you don't have to go straight to feeling pride and joy and being visible and marching on. You've got to go through that, make it sound like it's linear, but you've got to go through that journey as well. And it's not linear, and you'll always have days where it's like, oh, I wish that this wasn't. And then other days where it's like, yeah, I've got spoon to stay and I'm gonna be proud. And I think a similar thing with queer identities, obviously it's different because I wouldn't, there's no part of it would particularly want to be different in that sense. And it's obviously different from that point of view, but it's also still okay. I tend to sit like on trans day visibility. I, often post kind of going, it's also okay to not be visible. Okay, if you're just not. Because there isn't a lot of chat, I think, particularly with the kind of trans about, and particularly for later life, about kind of going through that journey yourself. And it's a lot about sort of accepting other people and how to speak to your trans friends and that kind of thing. But actually that side of going, well, am I this and is it that? And at what point do I say this? And what point can I, it is hard. And I think there are, I think it's one of the good things about the internet is that there are people out there that you can reach out to and whatnot. And but I think the other thing is to hold on to the joy of it and the reason that, like when I go out and I do drag and I come home smiling and and that's partly from the performing and partly from, I think, the kind of inhabiting the very masculine identity for the evening. And it brings me that joy. And this is the big kind of thing. I like to call it weaponized joy, because joy is something that whatever they do, that you can't legislate for it. And you can't go, I don't want you to be joyful. I don't want you to enjoy this thing. It's like, well, you can't do that. You can't. There's actually a great quote that I talk about in a bit of spoken word that I do, which is when the 1967 Sexual Offences Act passed, which was the thing that sort of decriminalised homosexuality, kind of. And there's a quote from the guy who sponsored the bill, who's like trying to get it through. It's saying, there's not a cause for celebration or jubilation, and any form of ostentatious behaviour would be utterly distasteful. And it's like, yes, you could, okay, we're not going to sentence you to life imprisonment for having gay sex, but you don't be happy about it. You better not be happy about it now. I think be ostentatious and joyful as much as possible, because that's not, you can even legislate what toilet you can use. You can legislate, but you can't, and you can make it harder to feel joy. Obviously, it's particularly, they really are doing that. But I think experiencing and just grabbing those moments of joy and going, yes, this is a good thing. And this is something that nobody can actually stop that. They can fight it, but you can't legislate against joy. And I think that's a really important point as well.
What a perfect place to end. But before we do, where can people find you, Lizzie, if they want to find out more about your work?
So mostly I'm on Instagram. You can find me either at Himish Macbeth, which is HIMISH_MACBEATH, or that's my drag account, or you can find me at LH_Macbeth, which is kind of more of my kind of normal acting. if you find either one of them, they're interlinked. I am also on Facebook at Himish or Beth because I'm quite old, but I don't know if anyone really uses Facebook anymore. I am on there if you're not an Instagram user.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Lizzie. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been amazing. Speak to you both.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Simply Equality Podcast. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and follow so you don't miss an episode, and you can check out our existing back catalogue. If you're looking for more ways to support Simply Equality or to work with us, check out simplyequality.com. And remember, you'll always be too much for someone, so you might as well be yourself. Be safe out there.